Listen-only mode.
Welcome to the Agitator Donor Voice webinar, How to Gain Massive Return on Investment by Fixing Donor Experience. Today's topic couldn't be more timely. This morning, the Center for Media Research released its study indicating that 98% of all retailers say that providing an exceptional customer experience, by the way, the new jargon term for customer experience is CX, is the single most important choice they can now make. I'm Roger Craver, editor of The Agitator, and with me today are Kevin Schulman and Josh Wichard, both partners in our sister company, Donor Voice, which is the donor experience and relationship firm. Also, we have folks with us from all over the globe for this session, from Australia and New Zealand, where it's 5:30 and 6:30 in the morning on Wednesday, and from all over Europe, where the day is ending, and well, perhaps some of you are even watching this in a pub, who knows. And from Asia to South and North America, whatever time zone you're in, welcome. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. This session will be recorded, and you will receive by separate email a link to the recording and also to the slides when we're finished. Please feel free to ask questions during the session. You need to type those questions into the chat space on your screen. If we can't get to all the questions in this session, we'll answer them individually. From time to time in the presentation that follows, we will be switching computers and therefore switching screens. Don't be alarmed. Stay tuned. There's nothing wrong with your screen, as the broadcasters say, or with your connection. The switch will only take a few seconds. A bit of background. Over the past few months, the Agitator has been doing a lot of posts and commentary on the importance of retention and therefore, by extension, about the necessity for focusing on donor experiences and securing donor feedback. Nothing is more important to achieving higher commitment, higher lifetime value, and greater retention among your donors than what we'll be covering today. You know, most folks are accustomed to spending a great deal of time and money on acquisition, only to see most of their investment flow through the leaky holes in the bottom of the retention bucket, and therefore losing that investment. They also most of us spend a lot of time and money on fine-tuning appeals or even working on stewardship and cultivation efforts. Our goal today is to help you spend some of that time and money far more profitably. We want to outline and explain a number of important elements of donor experience and alert you to the barriers that stand in the way of developing better donor experiences, share with you effective ways to map and measure those experiences. We also want to show you how and why you need to begin learning from the donors themselves about what you're doing wrong and what you're doing right where donor experience is concerned. What experiences are you bringing to keep the donors in the fold? What experiences are you offering that are driving them away? So let's move to the barriers that stand in the way of delivering better donor experiences. We're going to talk a bit this morning, today, about mindset change and how to begin measuring this differently and thinking about donor experiences differently. We'll also be covering various tools that are used to look at donor experience. Most of them kind of are designed to do something. I'm not quite sure what, and you'll see how we view most of these, but most of them are sort of an application of putting a square peg in a round hole. We're also going to look at how donor experience insight should really work, a shift from assumptive marketing. And assumptive marketing simply means that you, the organization, are making the assumption about what donor experiences matter as opposed to what experiences the donors really think matter. So how do you shift from assumptive marketing to more donor-driven marketing? And then we're going to come to the silver bullet, which is redefining donor service. And you'll see how just some small, inexpensive, easily done things will make all the difference in the world. So let's start by taking a look at the traditional view of donor experience so we can begin shifting mindsets here. There are two donors described here, which is a typical view of what I call CRM, or traditional fundraising. The donor on the left and on the right both made $25 contributions in 2013. Both gave $25. Both received a welcome package, and if these folks are typical of those in many organizations, they received 20 subsequent mail, or a combination of mail, online, telephone, other appeals. Now let's see what happened to them. The one on the left gave 2 more gifts. The second one in 2013, another $25 in October of 2014. But the donor on the right didn't give any more. So they end up at that end of that 2-year period with a lifetime value of $75 for the donor on the left and $25 for the donor on the right. So in the traditional view of things, these folks, there's nothing we can tell from their experience or from this transactional history. There's nothing in here about their experience. But from their transactional history, if we're looking at normal RFM, here are 2 quite different donors, but there's no explanation as to what accounts for that. So I'm going to turn this over now to Kevin, who will start explaining the importance of donor experience as we look at donors such as these 2.
Thanks, Roger. All right, so here's what's actually occurring in the real world, not CRM, traditional fundraising world. We still have our same 2 new donors who gave the same amounts on the same day to the same organization through the exact same channel. Except now we know that the one on the left is named Gertrude and the one on the right is named Mabel. And as it turns out, they had very different experiences with the exact same online giving process. Mabel winds up receiving an auto-generated email that's apologizing for the bad experience. So right away, if we are truly in the donor experience business and we're assigning value not to the transaction but understanding the experience that led to it, or there was a product of it, we understand that we've got a problem with Mabel. All of a sudden we've been able to discriminate between these 2 donors, and we're going to get to root cause on why one of them is going to continue to produce and the other one doesn't. So Mabel's going to get an auto-generated email apologizing for the bad experience. Gertrude's also going to get an auto-generated email that expresses happiness that she had a positive experience, and we're going to ask her to refer a friend. Why? Because that's appropriate given where Gertrude is and her experience with that online donation process. In addition, Mabel's going to get a phone call from a donor service rep that's going to further uncover that the frustration with the online giving form was actually user error, but it was understandable. They both had a quick little chuckle about it, and Mabel's going to feel better. Now they're still both going to get 2 years worth of email and mail and other kind of push-based communications. Gertrude and Mabel are both going to outperform the average lifetime value for this charity. That donor service interaction for Mabel cost us $5.45. It had a 70% ROI. In the CRM fundraising view of donor experience, this donor-saving interaction never occurs. We lose Mabel and many, many others just like her, but not before we dump another 2 years' worth of spend against her. Okay, now
Kevin, it might be
yep.
It might be helpful to let folks know how does the organization know to reach out to Mabel and Gertrude in those specific ways you just mentioned.
Yeah, and we're going to uncover all the details there, but to preempt that a bit, we actually asked them. So in this real world, we decided that the experience that they had with that online giving process was important to understand, and we couldn't understand it just based on the fact that they both clicked the red donate button. right? We needed to uncover, was that a positive or negative experience? We had our best intent to build a positive experience. We spent a lot of money trying to optimize the form, but in truth, there's no such thing as perfect, and there's no such thing as 100% optimized. So it was a pretty simple process once we assigned value to the experience they had, and recognizing that not all donors are going to have the same experience, we just asked them in a very straightforward follow-up to that online giving experience. That becomes the most important thing that we should do at that point in time. Okay? So that process of asking them right after the interaction and then sending out as a closed loop, purely automated way some sort of feedback to this person who just gave us feedback that is responsive to the experience they had, and then having a second tier of follow-up, an actual human interaction. This is how we can start to raise more money. All right. Now, one of the things that I want to point out as a footnote that we're going to likely re-raise during the session is that, don't fall prey to all the knee-jerk reasons why you can't do this, what we've just described, and we'll peel back the layers of the onion and share more detail here. But let me assure you, this is scalable. Everything, in fact, is scalable if we assign value to it. And if you can afford, in quotations, to lose most of your donors in the first year, which every charity does, then you can afford to scale up a business process that fixes that very problem and, by extension, has significant ROI. So don't think for a second that you can't do this, that it's not scalable, that we're not big enough. Those are both sort of false premises and dangerous false premises. All right, so to sort of extend and wrap up this mindset bit, the CRM traditional fundraising mindset is that higher donor value derives from volume and passage of time. That is a pretty inefficient and dangerous premise, and it is the mindset, and no one would likely state it this way, but it is by default the way that business is typically run in the sector. This is what's leading to the lousy retention and, more importantly, lack of growth, lack of real net growth that is going to fuel and fund your mission. Okay, one of the other...
Kevin,
yep.
when you say higher donor value is caused by volume, you mean the number of appeals, the number of just the sheer number of contacts, whether they're appeals or other things.
Correct.
Over a period of time is believed to provide a higher level of commitment or value among donors.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it tends to be the answer to all of our problems. So, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. The answer tends to be more stuff through more channels these days. Well, the challenge with that is that you get diminishing returns, and yet most charities will point to, if we do an extra mailing, we make additional net revenue. But that leads into the second problem with that CRM fundraising mindset. All we're measuring is success, right? And success are in quotes there because we often do that incorrectly. If we just go back to our Mabel and Gertrude example, which is rife within the sector, we're not even really measuring success that well. But success is really a transactional measure, some sort of behavior-based measure. They hit the donate button, and we're not paying attention to the experience that led to it and whether or not it was positive or negative. By extension, we get virtually no information about our failures. Right? The failures in this case are the non-responders, or all the donors who leave out the back door before we've had a chance to get a positive return on the investment. Most of these folks cost us a ton of money. Okay? So we never know about Mabel. So all the failures tend to be treated the exact same, and the exact same is really just a black hole of nothing. And so what we don't then, by extension, know is whether our failures, and again, think about failures in this context as all those donors leaving out the back door and the non-response that takes place through all of our mechanisms, which is always the vast majority of everything, right, the non-responders. We have a lot of bad assumptions, incorrect information about what caused the failure. Was it a function of poor execution? We don't know. And so the worst case scenario is donor 34568, otherwise known as Mabel, whose first interaction turns out to be her last, unbeknownst to the charity, because we wind up throwing another 2 years of spend against all the Mabels because we just don't know. And yet it's eminently fixable if the mindset changes. All right, so at this point we're going to have our first change of the screen here, which in theory should go flawlessly. I'm going to ask Josh to take over and walk us through the next section of the webinar here.
Thanks, Kevin. How did that go? Can you see my screen?
We're good.
Great. Okay, so barrier number 2, talking about wrong tools. Roger had talked about this in terms of square peg, round hole. Let me kind of stress up front that this is not just about having a new and better tool for the same job. The reality is that this is about adapting to the world in which the donor has moved to the multi-channel world, and yet we still often use the square peg, round hole tools like MS Excel or something similar to that to basically map out what was at one point in time in our program a single channel donor. Let me also add that what we're going to feature today as part of our discussion is the tool that we use. But understand, and Roger had talked about CX as an industry, and it is in fact exactly that. There are a lot of ways to do journey mapping. Today we're going to walk you through kind of an example of how we've done it, but recognize that there's many options at your fingertips through a simple Google search. So let's take a look at what we're trying to understand in terms of shifting from that assumptive mapping view of the world that Roger talked about to understanding the true donor's journey. And to do that, first I wanted to unpack and talk about kind of the gaps that we have with some of the tools that we have today. So the first one, this may look familiar to some people, sitting in a conference room, hanging up packages with Scotch tape, or the clothesline method, as some people called it. And this is in an effort, just collecting all the direct mail pieces oftentimes is a simple challenge. And getting them up in a place where people can view them and close enough or far enough away to see all of it in the same room is obviously a challenge. One thing I want to point out at the front of this whole process is learning kind of as people look at and do customer or donor journeys, one of the biggest pitfalls with this type of exercise is that when we talk about journey mapping, it's oftentimes the belief that if we actually have sent something or done something once, we've achieved success. So we can say that the donor doesn't feel properly welcomed, and then we can quickly point to the wall and the clothesline and see that, well, here's our welcome package right here, right? And what it doesn't account for from the donor's perspective is user error, as an example, as Kevin kind of talked about, but also doesn't account for the fact that we live in a busy world, that we're actually expecting that the donor received it, he or she opened it, and that they retained any of this, right? And what happens if the donor doesn't get or open or retain a critical touch point in an experience? How are we going to actually solve for that piece? So kind of thinking about the clothesline method, right? One thing it doesn't do here in the visual that you see is it doesn't account for time. Space in between contacts often have a huge impact on the donor experience, such as the thank you showing up too late. The next ask comes before the welcome or whatever that is, right? And understanding and getting into the business of managing, caring about those individual touch points as they occur is critically important. The second thing, too, is when you look at this is that the clothesline method is great for hanging direct mail packages, but it doesn't truly account for real multi-channel, right? It doesn't actually indicate or show when a welcome call is going to occur or when they're going to start getting emails unless you hang those individual papers there. And thirdly, it doesn't account for audience, right? In today's world, as we continue to get better and better at collecting data on our donors and then segmenting accordingly, it would take an enormous warehouse of a room to actually begin to easily map out and consume as the internal stakeholders what the experience looks like for individual audiences. Here's another one. And maybe some people will be familiar with this. This is the Post-it note methodology, right? And it's the pros to the Post-it note methodology, simply stated, is it's easy and it requires little resources. A stack of Post-it notes, ideally a stack of different color Post-it notes. And now all of a sudden we can actually visually show on here multi-channel, right? But What we now lose is the idea that this can account for, and we can actually see consistency of content and look and feel. What we say and how we say it to our donors matters a lot to the relationship and the experience, and Kevin's going to talk more about that. And the reality is, and I've been a part of this type of a planning process, that nothing about this format is lasting and can be easily controlled or updated, right? Oftentimes, this is what gets rolled up and put into a cubicle in somebody's office, once the meeting, and the next time we pull it out, the next time we're going to talk about the donor journey. The reality is that the donor journey is an ever-changing experience, and it requires that you have the ability to pivot with it. This what we kind of call the comms calendar. This is the infamous Excel document where a lot of these plans ultimately live. So whether you follow the clothesline method or the Post-it note method, everything likely ends up in a planning document like this. And if you try to print this out on 11 by 17 paper, you may get it into a 7-point font, right? And this is ultimately where the organizations live, right? And the one thing that I would stress most about this is that the single primary function of a document like this is a scheduling and planning document for internal purposes. It does not represent any way the view of what and how the donor is experiencing this, okay? I can't stress enough the importance that the donor experience is a living, breathing thing, and we need to be constantly looking at ways to manage and measure it differently. So how do we propose doing this better, right? In our view, there's a kind of a 4-step process to actually getting from that world of assumptive mapping to kind of truly looking at and measuring and managing the donor's experience. Kevin and I are going to kind of tag team this as we go through, and we're going to unpack it each of these steps as we go. And I'll just kind of start here. But step one is this idea of building this assumptive view by the internal stakeholders. And Roger had touched on that. That assumptive view is this is what we push out, right? This is likely the starting point for every organization, every team that gets together. And the reality is that oftentimes we can do this with very little homework, right? Assuming we've assembled the right group of people. So the assumptive view is what we push out and how the donor experiences it. Another way that people kind of refer to this or talk about this is that if you've gone one step beyond that, you're starting to build what we would refer to as a life cycle map, right? This is ultimately showing you the phases of the donor's experience if we've gotten beyond just putting everything together in a single spot, right? So we may be looking at the experience based on the acquisition channel they were acquired, their join year, and looking at what is a first-year donor getting from a second-year donor, okay? Ultimately, what we're striving to bring to bear is what we are truly calling a donor journey map, right? And what is that? Right? A donor journey map is it's in its simplest terms, it's a way to walk in your donor's shoes and chart his or her course as he or she interacts with the organization. So let me show you what we're talking about from the tool perspective. So looking at my screen, what you're looking for here is this is the touchpoint mapping tool that we use. First and foremost, one of the simplest, the wins that you have here is moving to a platform that's web-based. Getting the team of cross-functional area expertise and stakeholders in the room is the absolute single most important thing you're going to do when you're trying to map this together, because ultimately what we want to do is we want to include everything that the donor is seeing and getting from us. So the Post-it note option, the clothesline option, all requires you getting people into the same room. At least in this view, in a web-based platform, you're able to get people onto a WebEx looking at this in a more doable way. Okay, so let me orient you kind of quickly to the tool, and I won't spend a ton of time here, but it's kind of worth doing to show you. In its simplest form, what this tool is a customizable format that has essentially 4 attributes. We have rows going across this way, we have columns going this way, we have colors, and we have icons. Everything about this map and these tools that you can access now in today's market are 100% customizable. This is what we're referring to as the calendar view, the push schedule. This is the assumptive map. This is what we send out. If we wanted to change that, we can simply click on that and we can change that. If we wanted to change some of the labels, we can quickly touch on any of these touch points and we can change anything here. The key takeaway is that number one, this is consumable. This is the single view of 43 touch points a donor is having with the organization that you're viewing on a single screen, right? Number two is we have the ability to embed and store more information about the touch point level. So if we wanted to look at, for example, the individual touch point as the acknowledgement, when is that acknowledgement being sent out? We have notes about that here, okay? If we wanted to attach a PDF of that touch point, we could attach it here. And if we wanted to have this document managed and interacted with in the way that it should be, we can have a change log so we can understand and quickly look at all the people that are accessing it and the changes that are being made. The bigger and more important point of the value of this is actually getting into our ability to kind of toggle on different views of the donor journey. This is ultimately what Excel, if your marketing comms counter could be a pivot table, if people that are familiar with those would be, or if you could actually quickly move around, and this is what you can't do with the clothesline or the kind of the post-it note methodology. So we can actually toggle on and create different views of the journey, right? Additionally, we've got kind of colors and icons as additional layers. So in this case, the map that you're seeing here, we're showing the comms calendar that we're pushing out on a quarterly basis, and I'm able to show you everything that's happening by channel using these colors, and then additional layer of kind of detail about the touch point using what we're calling these icons, so we can understand and look at touch points that are asking for money. Okay? So the next thing that we want to do is actually be able to start to unpack and start to drill down on this journey and this touch point. And this is what a tool like this will allow you to do is, what if we wanted to actually not look at just the calendar view, but we wanted to isolate individual segments of the file, such as the new donor onboard experience, right? Oftentimes, these smaller segments of the journey that serve a specific purpose timing and coordination is important, so we need to actually be able to look at those individual touch points. Here you're seeing what the new donor onboard looks like, and we're actually showing you just the first month and showing you a drill down at what's happening on a week-by-week basis, okay? We're able to see how this changes, and you can create any and all of these views as part of that process.
And Josh, just to make sure everyone understands what you're doing here, the various colors here are also representative of channels. So this is a multi-channel view of what is happening with the welcome or acknowledgement package here.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. So in this case, you're seeing the blue touch points are direct mail, green are email, telemarketing in red, magazine in black, and so on and so forth.
So this is a terrific way to do some silo busting here. Break down some silos by getting a whole team together. If they don't work together all the time, this is a good way to show them what their collective efforts look like and where problems might be.
Yes, absolutely. And even kind of to your point, Roger, is actually looking at this, and this is a separate view where we've kind of started to look at this specific to those silos. So this is looking at a view of that comms calendar, those 43 touch points, and actually showing you what the purpose of those are. So we have now kind of pivoted to a view of the map where we're looking at rows that are based on fundraising, right? And we're showing just all the touch points that are asking for money. Row that's based on cultivation. These touch points that we have that may not be asking for money but are attempting to steward the donor through kind of a bigger relationship. Engagement touch points, these things that we're actually asking them to take action or host a DIY event or whatever that is, right? And then asking for feedback. You know, what touch points are we in the process where we're actually asking for feedback? In this case, there are none, right? And you can actually simply kind of toggle through, and you can even see and kind of catalog your touch points at this individual, you know, to this purpose level, and start to see on a quarterly basis where we're doing a lot of things and where we're not doing a lot of things, and start to identify these gaps as a way to say, hey, you know what, these people are going a long period of time without actually being engaged. Or, you know, we're giving them 5 touch points asking for money, yet we're only engaging them 1 time in the entire first quarter. And guess what? At no point during the year are we actually asking them for feedback. So where should that happen, and where should that occur? I'm going to give it back to Kevin and then let him walk through the kind of the next barrier, and we'll kind of come back to this map in just a second.
Great, thanks. Everybody sees my screen, right? Good?
Yes.
All right. So getting everything consolidated into one place with one of the tools that's out there is a heck of a lot better than clothesline or post-it notes or the Excel document that becomes a production schedule. There's no question about that. However, it's still one hand clapping, right? I mean, the getting into the donor experience business and the way that we're defining it is much more than that. That's a necessary starting point. We recognize that, but it's far from a complete move towards raising more money and improving the net and true growth in the sector. So just 5 questions to kind of tee up this next step in the process. And the first, which seems rhetorical, but it isn't, what's the point of all the spend and the time that we put against the house file? So everything that Josh just captured in the touch point map, 43 different touch points across channel over a calendar year. That's a lot of spend. That doesn't even factor in donor service interactions or event activity. I mean, it was illustrative and incomplete, so there's actually more time and effort spent against the house file. What is the point of all that? I mean, it never gets captured on anybody's budget as retention, but ultimately that's what it is. And by extension, we're spending an enormous amount of money on retention. It doesn't get, again, typically aggregated up within the budget and finance process and labeled that way, but there's an enormous amount of spend. And so managing the donor experience and improving the ROI of our activities, increasing retention, and actually growing is not a function of more spend. Okay? It's a function of optimizing the current spend. So if you were to organize all the different touch points, the 43, the 65, whatever it is, that's an important step one, to be able to see all of that. Now, it stands to, I mean, it's not a huge leap of faith to argue that not all of those touch points matter to the donor's loyalty to the organization and their decision to stick around. I mean, surely not everything matters. And by extension, those things that do matter, they can't all matter equally, right? So would you be confident enough to start circling on that touch point map or your post-it note view what works and what doesn't? And yet that's actually what happens all the time. We wind up concocting a lot of internal tests, A/B tests, or we're going to put this new touch point in market. Again, it comes back to volume. The answer is always more, right? We're going to roll out a loyalty program, whatever the heck that is, which means, in essence, we're going to target another 6 touch points in the first 6 months of the relationship, because that's where all the true retention problems exist, right? If we could only stop that, and surely the answer must be push out more stuff. And again, I mean, it just begs the question of how do we know? Too many assumptions in kind of the CRM traditional fundraising view of the world. And what do you do about touch points that don't have any direct behavior data? The magazine being a classic example, where most charities have kind of a hope strategy with the magazine. On a financial basis, it's a loser, right? It is a net loss. It's a big red number, and the CFO is constantly circling and asking how we can whittle that red number down. And the fundraisers or the marketers, the communicators, or the stewardship people, whoever's in charge of that, argue that, well, we think it matters to their future decision to give or to renew the membership. Okay? But how do you know? And really, as the threshold question, the point of this whole exercise, of this session, is if you can give a little bit of credence at least, to at least entertain the question here, if it is the donor's experience with the touch point that fully is identifying the value of that touch point, right, then why aren't we directly measuring it? And so that leads to this second step, this insights piece that is typically missing from the sector, that is really about cause and effect. Okay? We don't do a lot of cause and effect. We do a lot of looking in the rearview mirror, we make a lot of assumptions, and we do a lot of very inefficient spend against Mabel, who decided, unbeknownst to us, that right after her first interaction was also her last. Okay? So this is a pretty standard view of the world. We put a lot of activity on the left-hand side. This is all that's reflected in that touch point map, our 43 different push communications, along with some other functional areas that are having interactions with the supporters that actually matter, right? And then behavior is the piece over here on the right that we're trying to influence and affect. That's the ultimate purpose of any of our activity. And what is reflected by the big white space is that there's a piece in the middle that's missing in how we kind of look at and analyze the world. This piece in the middle is actually what's standing between a more efficient, more positive and lucrative set of constituent experiences that you serve up to influence behavior. And that is the relationship strength, right? It is their attitudinal loyalty. It's how they think and feel about you as an organization, how they think and feel about the touch points that you push out, how they think and feel about the experiences they have with things that are very pedestrian, like the online giving experience, right? And the reality is that all that we do in the 43 touch points in the touch point map we just looked at, none of those things directly affect behavior. They only indirectly affect it. What they directly affect is how the supporter thinks or feels, which in extension is what's causing them to do or give, okay? And an important corollary to all of this is that, and it was referenced in question number 5 there, if it's the constituent experience with the touch point that truly dictates the value of that touch point or that experience to the supporter, why aren't we measuring it more directly? And the only way that you can measure the experience that they had with the online giving process or the registration process or the live events or the engagement activity is we have to ask them. Okay? You've got to go out and collect this information because you don't have it sitting on your CRM. All right, so what does this actually look like? How do you go about doing this? This is going to, in turn, get to be a fairly busy slide. It's intended to be illustrative, so it's not specific to an organization. But this is worth going through because, again, this is all about getting the insights we need to infuse them into the touchpoint map and provide the one thing that we are missing so far, and that is what's the donor's experience with these touch points? Which of them actually matter and which ones don't? And what's the relative value of these touch points? Because we know that we're not doing an accurate enough or a job of determining value just by looking at the transactional data, and because a lot of these touch points don't even have transactional data. So quickly, by way of orientation, what you're seeing here is our measure of relationship strength or attitudinal loyalty. These are the attitudinal constructs. These are questions that you would ask of your supporters at a point in time. And there's questions that we can share. They're in the public domain. This is not a black box. And this is built on and predicated on what we know about cause and effect. How do we actually steer and influence the value piece, which is on the far right-hand side? This is lifetime value for a hypothetical organization. And what we know is that the strength of the relationship is going to dictate whether people stick around and achieve that lifetime value, whether they're a Gertrude or a Mabel, right? Functional connection definitionally is whether we're delivering reliable or consistent experiences. Personal connection is just what it sounds like, the more emotive part. And so right away we see that part of the 170 can be chased by improving personal connection, and part of the 170 can be gotten at by increasing functional connection. Now, the big missing question here is, what is it that we do as an organization by way of all those touch points that we push out there and the donor's experience with them that actually cause personal or functional? Remember, everything that we do, which we're going to uncover here into this white space, is directly affecting strength of relationship and, in turn, their behavior. So what you're seeing...
Kevin,
yep.
Kevin, let me just interrupt a second, because this, folks, is worth following closely, and if you have questions, ask them, because most of us, and I've been a direct response fundraiser for decades, most of us think that what we do by way of preparing those appeals or working on acquisition account for most of the success or failure financially of an organization. You're about to see why this is not the case and why this whole focus on donor experience and donor service and donor feedback, which we're talking about or we're going to talk about, is so important. So hang in there and follow along. Sorry, Kevin.
No, absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. We'll be sure to accentuate that point as we unveil this. So what you're seeing is the results of insights work, okay? And it's insights work that's built on cause and effect. We're trying to understand cause and effect, and it's pointed towards trying to figure out which of those 43 touch points, all of which have time, effort, and spend against them, actually matter. Which ones are actually causing strong relationships and value. And so what you do is at a point in time, we conduct a survey. We're collecting attitudinal data. Okay, it's missing from your CRM. If you try to have a bunch of proxies and assume things about based on transactional data, you're going to miss the boat entirely, and that's where the sector finds itself. So what we've measured is strength of relationship. What we've measured over here is, for this hypothetical organization, their 43 touch points. Okay, and importantly, what you're seeing is that we're evaluating in this case and asking the supporters about the ease of the process. I don't care, or it doesn't matter, we don't want to ask the donors whether or not we've got an online giving page. We don't need to ask the donors whether they've received communication X or Y. We don't need to ask the donors whether they know we have a donor service line or not. What we care about is the experience with those things. So that is what gets measured in this survey at a point in time. Their experience with it. Was it positive or negative? Okay, that's what's being evaluated here. Through an analytical exercise, we are determining which of those experiences that they have, and just think about the 43 touch points as the working illustration here, which of those 43 are actually causing value. There is no way on God's green earth, I don't care if you have the most loyal die-hard supporter on the planet, that they are processing 43 different touch points from you. Doesn't happen, okay? And your response data should give you some indication of that, not to mention the fact that the 43 is actually light. We haven't fully reflected all the different donor experiences, so even that is an incomplete view. So which of these actually matter? Which ones are causing functional connection or personal? That means that if we deliver this experience and deliver it well, it will increase their functional connection or their personal connection, okay? So that is step one in trying to move from the important step of organizing everything in one place. The next question becomes, which of these things actually matter? How do we start to make informed decisions about what we serve up? Okay, and so what has been unfolded here on the screen is a look at a bunch of donor experiences for a given charity. Everything that's in the middle column matters. It means it's having an impact on their decision to stay or go vis-a-vis this relationship strength. Okay? Everything on the far left doesn't matter to relationship strength and value. So we can start to see that there's opportunity to shift or reallocate resource. All right? And the other thing that we can do with this sort of analysis, once you get in the business of measuring the supporter's experience and doing it in a very specific way that we were illustrating here, you can actually assign value to these touch points, a lot of which have no transactional data. But it stands to reason that if the organization e-newsletter is having a positive impact on people's decision to give to the next appeal or to renew their membership or to just exhibit behavior that has them stay on the file and continue to get exposed to the push marketing, it has value. Okay? It may not have revenue that's directly attributed to it, but it has value. And once you get into this world of measuring experience, we can assign value to things that, on a transactional basis, we're left in the dark. It's that black hole of not knowing. Okay,
Kevin, so, without getting overly technical here or too technical, how do you arrive at value? For example, the 2503 for the newsletter.
Yeah, so it conceptually is about working backwards from right to left. So we know that there's this relationship, math-based relationship between the loyalty or the strength of relationship and giving, right? And we know that personal connection is accounting for 120 of the 170. And then we have identified through a modeling exercise, but it's a cause and effect model, which of these experiences that people are having are impacting personal connection. And each of these items that are shown to be causal of personal connection have a coefficient. That coefficient can be translated into a financial figure. Okay?
Thank you.
So in this case, we see welcome kit matters. But we also know, because we measure the experience directly, that for most folks, it's a broken experience. Okay? And in this instance, we know that the welcome kit is broken because it's got 43 different asks that we're putting in to the welcome kit. We want them to become a monthly donor. We want them to like us on Facebook. We want them to refer a friend. We want them to make another donation. It's everything and nothing all at the same time. So the welcome kit matters, but it's broken. E-newsletter and magazine, in this instance, have a positive impact. Okay? And just some other examples to highlight quickly, because we want to move on here in the interest of time. There's this question of gift impact, which is a catch-all expression. It's like saying, customer service. What the heck does that mean? You've got to deconstruct that. And here we see that gift impact as a catch-all phrase and a quote-unquote best practice is about meaningless. What we really need to do is tease apart gift impact. And in this case, gift impact only matters if we're talking about impact on families, not local community, developed countries, or future generations. Okay? Fundraising. Here we're going to see, going back to Gertrude and Mabel, that the easy process for online donations is, in fact, not easy because it's color-coded in red. It has value to us. The mere process of giving online and making that easy has value, and it's a broken experience at the moment. Donor service, which we're going to return back to kind of in full circle here, is typically thought of as a cost center, right? But we've already sort of pointed out that a human interaction with a supporter over a seemingly kind of boring, unsexy, pedestrian activity like they're trying to make a donation online, that human interaction matters, and it has a very positive ROI on lifetime value, and it tends to be kind of the backwater of most organizations. All right, I'm going to switch it back to Josh, who's going to take that insight and show us what we do with it when we go back to that supporter journey mapping.
While Josh is doing that, it's remarkable to me, Kevin, that including myself until I saw the figures and have gone over this with you and Josh over and over, so many of us attribute what we do, as I said earlier, to those appeals, to what we call generally fundraising. Yet, when you look at those charts you just went through, it represents only about 25% of the total success or the total value, lifetime value of a donor. So it's a pretty remarkable demonstration of, to me at least, of why it's so important to pay attention to donor experience and the donor journey, and to take the time to measure as best as possible what matters and what doesn't matter, because it sure matters to the bottom line.
No, you're right. I should have underscored that. And you've made this point before, Roger. I mean, we're pretty bad at attribution, right? We have a very simple, and the latest cutting-edge idea for attribution is we want to get credit for, the direct mail folks want to get credit for the online giving, and they well should. It's important to understand that tiny little dynamic, but that's a tiny little dynamic. We've got kind of filters or blinders on when it comes to thinking about all the different touch points and experiences and the impact they likely have on giving, and that looking at it just to understand direct mail and what impact that has on online giving is a very limited view.
Right.
Kevin, I don't have me listed as the current presenter. Have you changed over? I'm trying to show my screen, but it doesn't show me. I don't have the controls.
Oh, sorry.
There we go. Perfect. Okay, great. Everyone you see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, terrific. Okay, so yeah, to Kevin's point, this is where we want to come back to the map and building this donor's journey and not yours, right? So step 2 in here is validating the current donor experience with your donor input. And step 3 is this idea that we talk about of building future state. Ultimately, understanding things that are broken or things we need to change when we shifted insights from just the assumptive view to layering on this level of donor insight. And ultimately, using this new layer of insight and gathering that insight like Kevin showed in the blueprint at the touch point level, we can begin to see the donor journey take shape and now shift into looking at away from just best practices and our own opinions and starting to layer in the critical information in terms of how the donor is viewing that journey. Okay, so let's look at that, what that looks like briefly. So kind of bringing you back to the tool, what you're now looking at is a map of from the donor insight view. And the critical change that's happened here in terms of what you're seeing is note the inclusion of additional set of icons that are in color. Okay, so ultimately now, this is, I think, to the, Kevin had kind of used this as an illustration, the idea that we can easily put all the things that we push out into this calendar with little homework, but can we actually identify the ones that are actually having a positive impact and the ones that are having a negative impact on the relationship? And the answer is oftentimes no, right? So translating the insights from the blueprint onto the touch points is what we've done here. The things that are what we're calling kind of the moment of truth. These are the critical steps in the donor's journey where decisions are often being made to stay or go, right? Touch points that we should add. These are new touch points that are required to fulfill a donor's need that is currently unmet in the assumptive journey that we created, okay? The welcome kit that was in red, meaning it was important to the relationship, but was a broken experience, is a place in which we need to start to look at that touch point and identify changes. And it may actually mean we need to change to a different style in which we're providing this information in multiple touch points instead of just one. Drop existing touch points that are in the current journey that are actually having a negative impact or no impact on the relationship. That was in those columns kind of on the left-hand side. This idea of repair, which is things that matter. These are touch points that matter but are ultimately currently broken and need fixing, right? This is about revising them to meet the critical need that is required. And that may include changes to the brand, to the messaging that we use in the copy, and a chance to kind of take the next step, next action, okay? So we're able to look at it in this view, and ultimately what it's allowing us to inform is, okay, now that we have this insight, how does it begin to change the way that we should shape the donor journey? Here's a filtering view within the map where we can identify at the touch point level, using the insights from the blueprint, things that matter. This is essentially representing positive things that we are doing well that ultimately we would suggest would mean that we could consider scaling. So if we are great at delivering a magazine, then the quarterly magazine, how do we consider potentially adding a magazine, a fifth one to the year? Okay, and keep in mind, the goal here is that we have things that actually are not important to the relationship. Like maybe in this case, this is an illustration where we have the annual report, right? And so start thinking about these things that we're doing that are not important to the relationship are costing us time and money. This is about, as it's stated on that slide that Kevin showed, reallocating resources. This doesn't have to be about getting new budget or new spend. This is ultimately about spending the money and time and effort on the touch points that matter most, okay? So we can actually, within the map, begin to identify, okay, let's put these touch points together based on the insights that we've gathered from the donors. And then ultimately, we can begin to look at this in terms of, okay, so what are we going to in fact change? This is a view of the map where we're kind of showing you what current state looks like for the onboard versus what future state should look like on the onboard. Right? So again, going back to that view, now we're off of the calendar view, and now we're down to the segment level. Something happened in that welcome kit that was broken. So how do we actually begin to evaluate and change the way that we're doing that? Okay, and ultimately, the one thing to do here as well is to be able to step back and actually say, are we actually making changes that are going to be meaningful to the donor in the way that they see it? And if so, what are we going to do? Are we going to test these things? Everything we're suggesting and showing here are all testable propositions, right? We may, in fact, decide that some things are just frankly worth doing, right? And that we're going to make those changes. It may not cost us additional money. It just may make sense, right? Things like maybe adding a magazine into the new donor onboard process that may likely come from inventory of the last magazine that's sitting out there, and we're just including that here, and we want to just go ahead and do that. But ultimately, we're creating and can create the view of the world in which we're showing kind of current state and moving to desired state, which is kind of ultimately that donor experience view. So I'm going to hand this back to Kevin ultimately, and we're going to kind of go back to and talk about kind of step 4 in this process, which is this idea of kind of managing and monitoring the donor's experience with the critical touch points as they're occurring.
Yeah, so now we've taken the array of items that hang on the clothesline or that's sitting on the Post-it notes and organized in Excel that turns into a production schedule. We've put all of that into a view that is a square peg for a square hole, and now we've infused in donor insights, what actually matters to the supporter, so that we can scale, fix, or drop at kind of the highest level. Scale those that are winning touch points. We want to bring those to life, serve them up more often in different channels. We want to fix the things that are broken, and we want to reallocate or shift spend away from those things that aren't having a positive impact. And that is going to give you enormous improvement in donor experience, ROI on that spend, retention, and growth. However, there's even more that we can or should do, and this is, again, not about throwing a bunch of money at it. We're already throwing a bunch of money at it. This is about trying to change the mindset and have a different set of processes and metrics and tools that allow us to shift that spend into more productive uses if we start to really get beyond kind of the traditional CRM fundraising view of the world. And so let's return back to Mabel and Gertrude, because while we know that the online donor experience from this hypothetical we've been working on is broken, and yet it has value, we also know that it's not broken for everybody. There's Mabel and there's Gertrude, same experience, same process, different experience. And at this point, for the organization who's looking at this, we don't know exactly what to do to fix that online donation process. We just know that it's broken, meaning that disproportionately folks are having a bad experience there. Now we can make some guesses. Again, we're back to the assumption view. We're just going to make some guesses on how to change the form. We're going to wind up guessing wrong because we've got an infinite number of choices there. So how do we get back to that one-to-one relationship building that's going to allow us to discern if it's Mabel or Gertrude, but also give us that intelligence and that insight that we need to make a fix to this online giving process? And this goes back to the question that Roger had raised. Well, we're going to ask them, okay? So what you're seeing here is the thank you website confirmation page. This is ubiquitous. Everybody has one of these. After you get an online donation, you've got this page. Okay, it's going to say thank you. What we're doing in this instance is that the most important thing to do, other than the perfunctory thank you after they've just made an online donation, is to ask them for feedback about the donation experience. There is no more important ask or conversion goal at this point if you are making assumptions that it was success by virtue of the fact that they hit the donate button, and we're going to ask them to like us on Facebook or share this with a friend or consider a monthly giving option. We've made a fatal mistake. We've assumed too much. And at this point, the thing that makes the most sense is to find out about that giving experience, right? So it's,
I want to just emphasize something. I mean, all of us are sort of trained or instinctively say if someone's given a gift, they must be happy. What you're saying and what Mabel and Gertrude show, and the point I want to make for all of us, is that's not necessarily so. That once someone has done something, we need to go beyond that and ask them how they feel about it and what they ran into.
Precisely, right? Because we know that in the commercial space, and it's no different in the nonprofit space, that at least 50% of the repurchase decision has nothing to do with the mission or the brand. Okay? It has to do with these ancillary things that are considered pedestrian and unsexy. It has to do with process and service level experiences. Those have a material impact on whether they stick around or not. And we're not measuring it right now, hardly at all. So in this case, it's a simple little box. They click on it. It opens up their browser. And look what we're asking. We're asking, you'll see these are questions to measure the commitment, so that relationship strength part. We want to be able to put the feedback about the actual experience into context. Is this coming from somebody who loves us or somebody who doesn't? But most importantly, what we're measuring is satisfaction with that giving experience. Okay? And then what happens is that there's business rules that get applied Automatically. This is a very easy process. I'm going to automatically apply business rules based on the feedback, and then Mabel's going to get a certain message, and Gertrude's going to get a different one that's tied to their feedback. Okay?
Kevin, I might, pardon me for interrupting again, but to regular agitator readers, you'll recall we've run several posts on a feedback widget, such as Kevin's illustrating here, that is free forever. You go on the agitator site, in the middle of the home page, you can see a video on it. It's downloadable, and you can install this thing in 10-15 minutes. If you know what you're doing. I don't mean if you're a webmaster. It'll take you at least 2 hours to find the webmaster. But once you find her or him, it can be done in about 10 minutes, or anyone with a little bit of technical knowledge can install it themselves. So check that out. Sorry, Kevin. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's free. There's not a single attendee on the webinar today who should struggle to figure out how to get started. This is a free widget. It's 5 minutes. That's it. And the question is, do you want to continue to assume that hitting the donate button is a measure of success, or do you want to find out if it was Mabel or Gertrude? And it's knowable starting tomorrow if we elect to assign value to that. So this is just an example of the email that gets pushed out to this person based on that feedback that they gave about the online giving experience. And then this is the second level of follow-up, and this is the part that, again, we're going to hear a million reasons why they can't do this, right? And it's going to be, we can't scale it. We don't have somebody in charge of donor service. And to that, I would retort, if you can spend 2 years' worth of communications on somebody who doesn't come back, which, by the way, is most of your supporters who come in the door, I think we can afford to scale up a donor service operation if we're assigning value to it. So this is a case management report. What is this? It's just showing individual people and their responses. There is no better return on investment for trying to figure out how you can improve the lousy first-year retention rates than getting into the business of understanding these new donors and having interactions with them that are tied to the handful of interactions they're going to have with you in a given year. Okay? And so this is just a case management report. You're seeing that we've identified the churn risk for these folks. We see their level of satisfaction, their level of commitment to the organization. It becomes very easy for a donor service rep to go through and spend a few minutes on each of these, which is ballpark going to be $5 to $6 worth of spend for each person. That's going to have a massive impact on retaining these people. Okay? You can afford this. Everything's scalable. And you know, just as kind of proof positive, take a look at this test and control. Very, very standard process, right? Our control group, nothing changed. Test group, we altered one thing. And look at this is the performance 6 months later, 6 months after the test control bit was done. Okay? Massive change in purchase, attrition rate, and profit. And the only thing that was done, the only thing, was asking for feedback at a single point in time. Okay? There is a silver bullet. When it comes to a sector that is not doing this at all, this is how you can get in the game and have a meaningful impact and stand out from the crowd. All right, so last little bit here on this. So this was back to that question of, so how do we go about changing the online donation form? Well, you saw in that case management report that we're also getting open-end feedback about the online giving process. So those who say it wasn't easy are prompted to give us more information, and the vast majority actually do. You take that data and you analyze it. Okay, it's got enormous value. It's a gold mine. And in this case, we've made 7 changes to the online giving process, not because we hired some outside agency who dusted off best practices for what was done for the last 6 groups. It was because we talked to the supporters, identified those who had bad experiences, and then aggregated that feedback about their suggested improvements. Okay?
I can't emphasize enough the importance of this feedback as a big bottom line, boost your bottom line for virtually no cost, and find out something about how your your donor experiences are or aren't working. I don't know how they could be clearer than to look at that one simple thing that that there's a 35% increase in profit on a donor who's asked a feedback question. It boggles my mind that folks don't do more of this. In any event, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. All right, we're going to do one more sleight of hand back to Josh, who's going to kind of wrap all of this up. Again, looking back at the touch point map as a way to tie all this together.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so just kind of looking at this in terms of here's what we've done, right? So step one in this process was about kind of creating that assumptive map, collecting the idea of kind of what we're called the push world into this single flexible tool, right? Step two in this process was about gathering the donor insights that will enable you to understand the impact of each of these touch points and how it's impacting the donor's experience, positive and negative, okay? And that's what Kevin had talked about there in the blueprint. We talked about step three was around building the future state, and that was all part of it. So here we are now about in this space of managing and monitoring the donor experience with the critical touch points as they occur. Okay, so now we're actually able to truly tell the story about the donor's journey in itself. Okay, and this is kind of looking at a view of the map where we're beginning to layer on what the donor's experience is. These are these kind of touch points in orange here. And I will tell you that this is, I found our ability to layer in the insights we're gathering and capturing in terms of feedback at point of interaction are giving us actual donor sentiment to understand these honest, true moments of truth and navigate the key experiences as they're occurring, okay? So we have the ability inside of this map to actually start layering in that donor sentiment, that actual feedback. And let me show you what that looks like in a storyboard version. And our experience has been, this has probably been the most powerful way to articulate the experience and the pain points and create empathy inside an organization about how it's working from the donor's perspective. So this is also,
by the way, folks, stay tuned for this. This is not only informative because we all go through this, but it's fun. So go ahead. Those of you at the pub, get a refill and watch this. It takes a few minutes, and it's really worth it.
So what we're showing here is kind of the critical touch points, the moments of truth that are occurring, and we're going to isolate, show this based on the experience. So this is the point in which this person, for example, this illustration is that person receives an offer via email, a reason to donate and give, okay? And one thing I think is important to point out here is that a donor's journey with your organization begins before their first gift date. So go all the way back to Roger's illustration at the beginning of what's on the CRM database in terms of that is ultimately where we say the donor's experience began. But in fact, it is obviously happening long before their point of giving. And they may have actually had multiple impressions with the organization before they actually gave. Okay, and so connecting these individual quotes, what I've done is this is actual real feedback. We've gone through clients that we work with that are actually deploying and collecting feedback at points of interaction, like the examples that Kevin showed, and we're showing this. And these are not one-off examples. These are illustrations that are happening across every organization. In this case here, the person saying that the donation form on the website doesn't mention anything about the benefits that they received that they got in their mail piece, that this process just simply needs to be more elaborate and concise, both the information and the membership details. Right? We hear this all the time. I received your direct mail piece, and it offered me an opportunity to get a matching gift. I, however, decided to go through your website instead of donating via mail, and I can't find that experience. So coordinating those experiences within your acquisition program and including that in the map is critically important. Okay? This is kind of this is actually looking at the individual interaction. So if that person actually received the email offer, clicked the link, and wanted to donate, what we measure is success. As Kevin talked about, and covered this, I think, very well in terms of we never look at the failures, and ultimately, this is Gertrude and Mabel. Right now, everyone's giving, and we're going to now give them 24 months of stuff, but we don't know how that process went. Here's an example. I'm extremely disappointed that for donations in memory of you have no provision that the family can automatically be notified. Unless this is changed, I will never specify donations to your organization again. So the email acknowledgement, I'll tell you, we have seen countless number of examples of pain points with acknowledgments, both in mail and online. This is a collection of feedback. I have 3 different examples here from 3 different organizations, and looking at the way that people are interacting with your information. They reached the confirmation page, and all they want to do is be able to print off a neat 1-sheet page of a receipt and acknowledgement. And yes, we are likely going to email them that receipt. I will say, to the extent that it's possible, to identify insight that matters for everyone, as a free piece of advice, giving people the option to actually print a neat 1-page receipt on that confirmation page, as opposed to waiting for an email, is a change to an experience that seems to matter to a lot of people. You can see these examples here as you look at it. They've literally began to say they had a bad experience with this, and we can and should be in the business of fixing it. How do we do that? It's kind of the examples that Kevin talked about. I have this quote from an evangelist at Google, which talks about that all the quantitative data that we can collect from our web analytics tools are really good at helping us understand what happened. It cannot, no matter how much you torture the data, tell you why something happened. The feedback that we're collecting, the experiences that we're seeing, are very clear proof to that fact. Okay, and looking at the people here, this person actually donated. They wanted to send a card, and this person on our database is going to be a new donor. In their experience, they are gone, and they are desperately trying to get away. I've requested a refund for all the recent purchase of gifts and memberships, and I've gotten no response. The new donor welcome kit. This is, Kevin talked about this a little bit. We see this as a pain point. How does this actually change? And ultimately, what we need to be in the business of is offering a map instead of a menu. Okay? Using the insights from the blueprint, we can identify the experiences that are most important. Those are the things that we should be including in that welcome kit and breaking that apart, right? I was informed I would be getting premiums, and I did not get those. I had called about my calendar and have not gotten those. It's these touch points. This is the beginning of the process where we need to take the temperature of how we're doing and how we're actually fulfilling on what we said we would do. I've worked with an organization and collected data, and we found that of the feedback, over 20% of the people are actually commenting that they have not gotten the simple things that we promised, like a back-end premium or something. That we're losing those people right off of the top before we even get them into the funnel.
And again, of course, if you're not asking people for feedback, you're not going to find this out. It sure isn't going to appear in your database.
Yeah, and I would underscore these examples that Josh is highlighting. I mean, these are things that get paid attention to by the operations team on some Excel document, the process and the business rules. We've got some fancy flow chart that dictates it, okay, and we think we've accomplished something. I will tell you that all of these things that are very unsexy, they're not interesting, they're not creative, but it's the online registration process, it is the fulfillment process with the premiums, it is the fact that comments go unreturned or unattended to, that guess what? Those are a part of your brand. The donor's experience in all of these pedestrian ways are a part of your brand, and it's being ignored right now, and it is a massive contributor to your lack of growth.
Yep. Looking at this, absolutely, ultimately, this should not be a risky proposition. This idea that if we actually are listening to and we act on people's feedback, they will in fact have a better experience. Solicitations, we know that sending out more often net yields higher net in total, right? But ultimately, we are losing people. This is a direct feedback of a person that's saying, thank you for listening to me. I had threatened to stop supporting you, but you came through. Without asking the feedback, we won't know, right? And using the insights to identify the touch points that matter and being great at delivering those is what gets us into this space of actually creating great donor experiences, right? This is the welcome call. A person saying, it took a little while to get a response, but I'm totally pleased with the outcome. The reply email was very well written. We have created a memorable experience for Gertrude and Mabel in this instance. And we're focusing on touch points that matter, and those are the things that are going to drive stronger relationships and higher value. Autobahn does a tremendous job with their magazine. This is a touch point that matters. And to be clear, we are not in the business of saying that every organization should have a magazine. To Kevin's point, in those blueprints, we've done plenty of these, and the answers are not always the same. I caution everyone to be wary of best practices. If another organization has a magazine, you should have a magazine. If you have a magazine and you're great at doing it, it probably does count as a good experience, and you should try to do more of it, okay? And ultimately, we're not in the magazine creation business or the magazine killer business. This is just one example of an organization that's doing it well. So ultimately, by combining all of this into kind of this experience and looking at this in a single view and managing the relationship, as Kevin talked about, this is the donor's journey. And this is where we've got to start going forward to start building the ROI and the LTV that organizations are seeking.
Okay,
Roger,
well,
I'll hand it back to you.
Kevin and Josh, thank you very much, and folks, thank you. I mean, just to sum up, we've dealt with the barriers, but I do want to tell you, I've worked with these guys for 5 years. They did a piece of the research that I used in my book, Retention Fundraising. I've watched what they've done for other organizations, and in a nutshell, if you'll pay attention to this and get serious about understanding donor experiences and apply some of this, you will see a substantial 50%, I think, on average, decrease in attrition, a 7-point increase in retention, which is an enormous increase in your bottom line, a substantial increase. It's been ranging from what Tom and I have seen from 18 to 131% increase in net revenues. And there are small pockets of activity like donors, seemingly small, like donor service, where you get an enormous return on your investment by paying attention to it. So if you have to review the recording and the slides several times to better understand this, please do, and please send them to me or Tom your questions, and we'll answer them individually. Those that are universal, we'll answer them in sort of an FAQ, but questions aimed at individual organizations we'll answer personally. And at the end of this, the last slide is the contact information, and of course a shameless plug for my book, Retention Fundraising, which unfortunately we can't offer free because the publisher doesn't publish it free, but I hope you'll take a look at it, because some of the theory behind this is explained hopefully simply in that book. So thank you all for your time. Kevin and Josh, thank you very much for what I frankly think is the most thorough experience I've had around donor experience. And I wish you all a good morning, a good evening, a good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you.